The Barber of Seville, or The Futile Precaution is an opera buffa in 2 acts by Gioachino Rossini with an Italian libretto by Cesare Sterbini. The libretto was based on Pierre Beaumarchais's French comedy La Barbiere de Séville copyright Ville. The premiere of Rossini's opera took place on February 20, 1816 at the Teatro Argentina, Rome. Rossini's Barber has proven to be one of the greatest masterpieces of comedy within music, and has been described as the opera buffa of all opere bouffe. Even after 200 years, its popularity on the modern opera stage attests to that greatness. Composition history: Rossini's opera recounts the first of the plays from the Figaro trilogy, by French playwright Pierre Beaumarchais, while Mozart's opera La Noce di Figaro, composed 30 years earlier in 1786, is based on the second part of the Beaumarchais trilogy. The first Beaumarchais play was originally conceived as an opera copyright comique, but was rejected as such by the Coma copyright d'Italienne. The play as it is now known was premiered in 1775 by the Coma copyright d'Ifrana sectionnaires at the Centre des Tuileries in Paris. Other operas based on the first play were composed by Giovanni Paisiello, by Nicolas Izard, and by Francesco Molacchi. Though the work of Paisiello triumphed for a time, only Rossini's version has stood the test of time and continues to be a mainstay of operatic repertoire. On November 11, 1868, 2 days before Rossini's death, the composer Costantino Dorlagine premiered an opera based on the same libretto as Rossini's work, bearing a dedication to Rossini. The premiere was not a failure, but critics condemned the audacity of the young composer and the work is now forgotten. Rossini was well known for being remarkably productive, completing an average of 2 operas per year for 19 years, and in some years writing as many as 4. Musicologists believe that, true to form, the music for Il Barbiere di Siviglia was composed in just under 3 weeks, although the famous overture was actually recycled from 2 earlier Rossini operas, Eliano and Palmira and Elisabetta, Regina d'Inghilterra, and thus contains none of the thematic material in Il Barbiere di Siviglia itself. Performance history: the premiere of Rossini's opera was a disastrous failure, the audience hissed and jeered throughout, and several on-stage accidents occurred. However, many of the audience were supporters of one of Rossini's rivals, Giovanni Paisiello, who played on mob mentality to provoke the rest of the audience to dislike the opera. Paisiello had already composed The Barber of Seville and took Rossini's new version to be an affront to his version. In particular, Paisiello and his followers were opposed to the use of basso buffo, which is common in comic opera. The second performance met with quite a different fate, becoming a roaring success. The original French play, La Barbiere de Séville copyright Ville, endured a similar story, poorly received at first, only to become a favorite within a week. The opera was first performed in England on March 10, 1818 at the King's Theatre in London in Italian, soon followed on October 13 at the Covent Garden Theatre by an English version translated by John Fawcett and Daniel Terry. It was first performed in America on May 3, 1819 in English at the Park Theatre in New York. It was given in French at the Centre de la Copyright Anne's in New Orleans on March 4, 1823, and became the first opera ever to be performed in Italian in New York, when Manuel Garcia and his Italian troupe opened their first season there with Il Barbiere on November 29, 1825 at the Park Theatre. The cast of 8 had 3 other members of his family, including the 17-year-old Maria Felicia, later known as Maria Malibran. The role of Rosina was originally written for a contralto. According to Richard Osborne, because of its popularity, singers have sometimes distorted Rossini's intentions. The most serious distortion has been transposition of the role to a higher pitch, turning her from a lustrous alto into a pert soprano. In addition, the singing lesson in Act 2 has often been turned into a show-stopping cabaret. Adelina Patti was known to include Luigi Arditi's Il Bascio, the bolero from Verdi's I Vespri Siciliani, the shadow song from Rabia's Denora, and Henry Bishop's Home, Sweet Home. Nellie Melba followed suit, accompanying herself on the piano in the final song. Pauline Bardot began the practice of inserting a Labive's Nightingale. Maria Callas sang a cut-down version of Rossini's own Contro un cot. Once after Patti had sung a particularly florid rendition of the opera's legitimate aria, Una voce poco fa, Rossini is reported to have asked her, "Very nice, my dear, and who wrote the piece you have just performed?" As a staple of the operatic repertoire, Barber appears as number 9 on the Operaverse list of the most performed operas worldwide. Because of the increasing scarcity of good contraltos, the role of Rosina has most frequently been sung by a coloratura mezzo-soprano, and as in the past, and occasionally in more recent times, been sung by coloratura sopranos such as Marcellus Imbrich, Maria Callas, Roberta Peters, Gianna D'Angelo, Victoria de los Angeles, Beverly Sills, Lily Pons, Diana Damrau, Kathleen Battle and Luciana Serra. Famous recent mezzo-soprano Rosinas include Marilyn Horne, Teresa Berganza, Lucia Valentini Tirani, Suzanne Marci, Cecilia Bartoli, Joyce Di Donato, Jennifer Lamore, Elena Garanaya, and Veselina Kasaruva. Famous contralto Rosinas include Iwa Podlia. Roles. Synopsis: Place: Seville, Spain. Time: 18th century. Act 1, the square in front of Bartolo's house. In a public square outside Bartolo's house, a band of musicians and a poor student named Lindoro are serenading, to no avail, the window of Rosina. Lindoro, who is really the young Count Almaviva in disguise, hopes to make the beautiful Rosina love him for himself or not his money. Almaviva pays off the musicians who then depart, leaving him to brood alone. Rosina is the young ward of the grumpy, elderly Bartolo, and she is allowed very little freedom because Bartolo plans to marry her, and her not inconsiderable dowry, himself a euro once she is of age. Figaro approaches singing. Since Figaro used to be a servant of the Count asks him for assistance in helping him meet Rosina, offering him money should he be successful in arranging this. Figaro advises the Count to disguise himself as a drunken soldier, ordered to be billeted with Bartolo, so as to gain entrance to the house. For this suggestion, Figaro is richly rewarded. A room in Bartolo's house with 4 doors, the scene begins with Rosina's cavatina, Una voce poco fa. Knowing the Count only as Lindoro, Rosina writes to him. As she is leaving the room, Bartolo and Basilio enter. Bartolo is suspicious of the Count, and Basilio advises that he be put out of the way by creating false rumors about him. When the two have gone, Rosina and Figaro enter. The latter asks Rosina to write a few encouraging words to Lindoro, which he has actually already written. Although surprised by Bartolo, Rosina manages to fool him, but he remains suspicious. As Berta, the Bartolo housekeeper, attempts to leave the house, she is met by the Count disguised as an intoxicated soldier. In fear of the drunken man, she rushes to Bartolo for protection and he tries to remove the supposed soldier, but does not succeed. The Count manages to have a quick word with Rosina, whispering that he is Lindoro and passing her a letter. The watching Bartolo is suspicious and demands to know what is in the piece of paper in Rosina's hands, but she fools him by handing over her laundry list. Bartolo and the Count start arguing and, when Basilio, Figaro and Bertie appear, the noise attracts the attention of the officer of the watch and his men. Bartolo believes that the Count has been arrested, but Almaviva only has to whisper his name to the officer and is released right away. Bartolo and Basilio are astounded, and Rosina makes sport of them. Act 2, a room in Bartolo's house with a piano. Almaviva again appears at the doctor's house, this time disguised as a singing tutor and pretending to act as substitute for the supposedly ailing Basilio, Rosina's regular singing teacher. Initially, Bartolo is suspicious, but does allow Almaviva to enter when the Count gives him Rosina's letter. He describes his plan to discredit Lindoro, whom he believes to be one of the Count's servants, intent on pursuing women for his master. Figaro arrives to shave Bartolo. Bartolo demurs, but Figaro makes such a scene he agrees, but in order not to leave the supposed music master alone with Rosina, the doctor has Figaro shave him right there in the music room. When Basilio suddenly appears, he is bribed by a full purse from Almaviva and persuaded to leave again. With much discussion of how ill he looks, Figaro begins to shave Bartolo, but Bartolo overhears the lovers conspiring. He drives everybody away. The scene returns to the location of Act 1 with a grille looking out onto the square. Bartolo orders Basilio to have the notary ready to marry him to Rosina that evening. He also explains his plot to come between the lovers. Basilio leaves and Rosina arrives. Bartolo shows Rosina the letter she wrote to Lindoro, and persuades her that this is evidence that Lindoro is merely a flunky of Almaviva. Rosina believes him and agrees to marry him. The stage remains empty while the music creates a thunderstorm to indicate the passage of time. The Count and Figaro climb up a ladder to the balcony and enter the room through a window. Rosina shows Almaviva the letter and expresses her feelings of betrayal and heartbreak. Almaviva reveals his identity and the two reconcile. While Almaviva and Rosina are enraptured by one another, Figaro keeps urging them to leave. Two people are heard approaching the front door, and attempting to leave by way of the ladder, they realize it has been removed. The two are Basilio and the notary, and Basilio is given the choice of accepting a bribe and being a witness or receiving 2 bullets in the head. He and Figaro witness the signatures to a marriage contract between the Count and Rosina. Bartolo barges in, but is too late. The befuddled Bartolo is pacified by being allowed to retain Rosina's dowry. Recordings. References, notes. Sources: Cordia, Henri. Bibliography des Ouvres de Beaumarchais. Paris, A. Quentin. Copy at Google Books. Foyle, David. Berger, William. Text accompanying Rossini, The Barber of Seville. New York, Black Dog and Leventhal. ISBN 978-1-57912-618-6. OCLCA 840,078,233. Gossett, Philip. Brauner, Patricia, The Barber of Seville in Holden, Amanda, The New Penguin Opera Guide, New York, Penguin Putnam. ISBN 0-14-029312-4. Kman, Henry. A Music in New Orleans, The Formative Years 1791–1841. Baton Rouge, Louisiana State University Press. ISBN 9780807105481. Cobbe Copyright, Gustav. The New Cobbe Copyrightus Opera Book, edited by the Earl of Harewood and Anthony Peattie. New York, G. P. Putnam Sons. ISBN 978-0-399-14332-8. Lowenberg, Alfred. Annals of Opera 1597–1940. Totowa, New Jersey, Rowman and Littlefield. ISBN 978-87471-851-5. Malitz, Leo. The Opera Goer's Complete Guide, translated by Richard Salinger. Garden City, New York, Garden City Publishing. Copy at Google Books. Osborne, Charles. The Bel Canto Operas of Rossini, Donizetti, and Bellini. Portland, Oregon, Amadeus Press. ISBN 0-931340-71-3, Osborne, Richard, The Barber of Seville, in Stanley Sadie, The New Grove Dictionary of Opera, Vol. 1. London, Macmillan Publishers, Incorporated. ISBN 0-333-73432-7 ISBN 1-56159-228-5, Osborne, Richard, Rossini, His Life and Works Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0-19-5129-6, Summer, Susan T. New York and Sadie 1992, Volume 3, pages 585–592. Sterbini Romano, Ser. Almaviva ossia al Futile Precaution. Con musica del maestro Gioachino Rossini, libretto in Italian. Rome, Crispino Puccinelli. Copy at Google Books. Weinstock, Herbert. Rossini, A Biography. New York, Knopf. OCLCA 192,614 and 250,474,431. Reprint, New York, Limelight. ISBN 978-87910-071-1. External links: Italian libretto at Google Books, Italian libretto at Stanford.edu, English libretto at operacarolina.org, The Barber of Seville, free scores at the International Music Score Library Project, German, Der Barbier von Seville, article with photos of a 2009 production at the Czar I Quarterich Opera House, Erwerche, 1929. Toscanini, New York Philharmonic Orchestra.